What's this button
Okay,
do?
we are recording. It's Tuesday. It is noon, Tuesday, August 25th, 2020.
Yes.
And last week we thought we would talk about resilience, but we spent so much time talking about Ring Central, we never got to resilience. So we promised this week we're going to talk about resilience and specifically building
Teams.
a resilience team, what
Yeah.
that means, why you should have
Hmm.
one, who should be involved, the mistakes people often make when trying to build a team like this. And I
Avoidable
would say
mistakes
mistake number
that
one is they don't build a team. So
yeah, yeah. It's not uncommon, but it's less common now. I mean, I think it's really been kind of apparent, it hasn't been so self-evident before that planning always has value for stuff like this, not just global events, but any unplanned event that can disrupt our productivity, like human error. I mean, I have to say that, we can have all the plans in the world, but being as kind of broadly prepared has more value than any specifics, right? So
mhm.
and this is, are we ready to just dive into this? Should we just start
Yeah, I was
talking
going to
about
say I
it,
was
or
going to start by saying let's define what a resilience team is.
resilience? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, resilience is a funny word because at least the first thing that pops into my mind when somebody says resilience is I think of kids. Because kids, everybody says kids are so resilient. It's a good thing kids are resilient. Like I don't know how many
Yeah,
times I've heard that,
you can drop them
in my
on
in
their
my
head and
life.
they survive.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of and resilience in recent years has been more and more associated with like the social sciences, like being resilient to things that happen to us that are negative, right? There's a big, part of us, a part of our, attention that is attracted to those kinds of things in media. And I see headlines all the time that resilience in the context of, emotional resilience, and
Hmm.
financial resilience is probably the next thing that I see. But resilience is really pervasive in technology. The last, 15 years or so, there's been a movement to be more resilient, much in the way that social sciences and even like civil planning, right? Like I have had clients over the years that are civil engineers that are planning systems for communities, right? Whether that's an information system, an SIS, like a student information system, or something
Hmm.
more focused on the city infrastructure or town or county or state. But resilience is really a part of everything now. I mean, in terms of technology and consulting, it's not so much about cybersecurity anymore. I mean, cybersecurity is pretty much dead. Like you won't even hear us
Hmm.
say that word. We don't say that. Michelle doesn't say, "Is there cybersecurity? Let's talk about cybersecurity." Or I don't say cybersecurity because it sucks all the air out of the room. First of all, we don't like to talk about it. It makes us feel dumb and incompetent. And part of the reason that we've moved on to resilience is because cybersecurity didn't work. It didn't, even if we did a great job ourselves as regents of our personal information and our accounts and our passwords and our logins, unfortunately, we have to share those with companies, right? And
Yeah.
those companies may or may not be competent stewards, and regents of our information. And that's what we read about in the newspapers is when some company has been negligent with our personal information. And so we have to plan for a lot of
Hmm.
different kinds of things. And resilience is really the focus of that. Some people call it business continuity, right, Ben? I mean, we run into
Hmm.
that in
Right.
our audit conversations with folks, but it's really how prepared are we? Resilience means how prepared are we to respond to
Yeah.
something unplanned?
Yeah, I'm going to share just a very basic example, which I think is a good one because it doesn't typically sound like a security issue, because it's really not.
Yeah,
It's a resilience issue, and it's very
sure.
basic, but it's something that I hear a lot, which is we have clients who maybe they don't want to have any downtime, like they need to be operational, as close to 100% as possible. But we all know that technology can break for any reason at any time. And most of us are now carrying around laptops, and we could have water damage. We could drop it. We could have
Right.
theft. There are a number of things that could contribute to a laptop suddenly not working. So
Sure.
it sounds very basic, but the solution to that, to being more resilient, is to have at least one, if not a few spares in your fleet,
Yeah.
so that when you do run into an issue, you're not running to the Apple store to replace it. You're pulling from your inventory of spare notebooks. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I mention
Because
that
the
is,
only thing you can be sure of is that you will run into an issue.
yeah, yeah, you
That's,
will
I
eventually
mean,
run into an issue.
you're making a
And if
huge
you're
point.
okay with, you know, on the one hand, if you're okay with going to the Apple store and getting a new computer, that could be part of your plan, your resilience plan.
Maybe
Well,
it's
we're going
down
to
the
go to the
block. Maybe
Apple
it's next
store.
door.
What's
Yeah.
that? Yeah,
Maybe
it
it's
could
down
be
the
next
block.
door. Could be next door.
Sure.
Just like if Trader Joe's is down the block from my house, then maybe rather than take all the groceries home once a month or once a week, I'll just go to the store whenever I need something. But
Yeah.
um, but you have to also think about when you're going to the Apple store, they may not have what you need in stock. They may have entry level versions, not the pro version that you need. So you have to plan out some of this stuff. And oftentimes our clients need custom versions that you can only get online, which means they take at least a week to
Mm-hmm.
ship. So now you're talking about a week of downtime. And so it's a little thing, but if your resilience team comes together and says, well, where are our weak points where we could run into issues that we need to be able to recover from quickly, that could be one of them. And all it takes is just investing in a computer that sits, in your inventory. Um, and that's a small investment to make to keep that resilience,
That's a
at
part,
a high
but
level.
that's a huge, that's a huge piece of value, but a small slice of the pie of the value that a resilience team can bring to organizations, right? It's
Hmm.
just thinking about this kind of stuff. It's different in every single organization. If there was like a one size fits all framework, we would be using it, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
And so we just to sit down and talk about this, kind of uncover these kinds of things before they happen, even just having an informal meeting once a year can save everybody so much time in a crisis. I mean, it's really
Hmm.
just a great place to start. Just build a team. Who are the most kind of key players? Who owns workflows? Who owns how information flows in and out of the company, right? It also helps a resilience, team. It's not even just technology. It's also things like um, capacity planning, right? Even things like if someone's leaving the company,
Hmm.
right? Resilience team is a great place to start thinking about, well, what are all the loose ends? What's the tribal knowledge that's going to be missing when they leave, right? To start asking these kinds of questions. Driving. It's really a strategic team. It's not
Hmm.
just technology. It's not just people. It's not just process. It's all of them, and thinking about it from a perspective of how can we protect the company by being prepared to respond to a
Hmm.
lot of different kinds of issues. Some of them, almost everything touches technology now, so it makes sense, right? But it bridges the
Yeah.
gap because a lot of folks and a lot of small medium sized companies, organizations have HR people, or they may have someone that's doing both of those things,
Yeah. Let's
finance
talk
and
a little bit
HR.
about who should be on the team, because I think
Yeah,
that's
let's do that.
important. And it's also, it really should be a team. It shouldn't just be one person. Like even in a small company, it shouldn't just be me as the
It's hard to
resilience
do it that way.
team.
Mm-hmm.
I may have a stronger or louder voice just because I'm sort of leading the company, but I need to get other people involved and understand what their view is and what their experience is and their workflow. So
No
so
one knows
Chad, I know we
everything,
often
right?
yeah, we often talk when we're talking to teams, and we're often part of the team from a technology
Yeah.
standpoint and a security standpoint, part of the resilience team. But then we
Mm-hmm.
also want to see someone from HR involved. I mean, there's a lot of
Yep.
overlap between uh, how we communicate a resilience strategy to the team and how HR communicates to
Yeah.
employees and the
Yep.
needs of both.
And they
We talk
also
about.
understand HR pros. They understand a lot of these compliance
Hmm.
frameworks already, right? I mean, they understand, HIPAA more
Hmm.
deeply than a layman, for example. They understand the kinds of responsibilities they have because they're dealing with sensitive information all day. They're dealing with, compensation levels, and they're
Hmm.
dealing with healthcare provider stuff and walking people through situations that are personal and very hard, sometimes health related, sometimes, externally related, not to their internal culture. And that kind of insight is really valuable, especially when you're building, say, a security
Mm-hmm.
control, that you want people to use, right? Because if you introduce it in a control, you're just walking around and you're trying to build your security program by just like clipboard and checkboxes. People are just going to work around your controls, and they're going to you're going to end up creating more risk for yourself in the long term. And so a resilience team also can kind of try to help repair some of the damage that's been done. A lot of security teams have gone through organizations and just destroyed cultures, and so
Oh yeah.
what most of our experience has been, and same, I don't know what Michelle or you, Ben, what your experiences have been with security people, but my experience hasn't always been
Yeah.
easy. It's been
No.
even today, I'm really choosy who we collaborate with, because it's easy to stomp all over people and make them feel like they're not a part of the solution, and making them feel like they're a part of the problem.
Yeah, and that's why you want to get different perspectives, because if we all just got the perspective of IT, and I'm not talking about our perspective, I'm talking about
Sure.
traditional old school IT, they
Hmm.
have done a lot of damage when it comes to communication and culture,
Yeah.
in the name of security, which is kind of misleading, I think. But anyway, that's my own soapbox.
Sure.
So you
That's
mentioned
okay.
compliance. I just want to point out, because there are, I'm sure, a lot of companies and a lot of clients that we have who feel that they don't, fall under any type of compliance. Like there are clearly companies have to meet certain compliance requirements to operate, and that could be what are some of the terms, like business continuity plan. You must have one, or SOX.
Yep.
What are some of the terms,
Well, I
Chad?
mean, there are so
There are
many. I
tons
mean,
of
it
them.
really, and all of it. We don't really have anyone to thank. Like socks. You brought up socks. That's a great one, because we have Enron. We have those greedy, you know,
Hmm.
jerks at Enron to thank for that, right? And so, when they were defrauding people out of their retirement and doing all these things that were very negative, the regulated industries, the SEC and organizations that manage all that stuff from a financial
Hmm.
perspective. In this case, SOX is a financial reporting framework, and so now people have to quarterly produce a lot of checkboxy, reporty type stuff about
Yeah.
access and files and all that stuff. And there's pros and cons to it, right? It's a drag, but at the same time, you would be hard pressed to find a senior level systems administrator or strategic technology person within an organization, large or small, who hasn't gained an extraordinary amount of insight from doing these compliance exercises
Yeah.
every quarter,
But
because you just build so much deeper familiarity with your operations. And so
mhm.
there's pros and cons as our larger, maybe you were going to say something about
Well, I was just going to say there are clearly
that.
organizations that have to meet compliance standards, and they have a clear vision about what they need, maybe from their resilience team to help get there. But any company of any size, even if you truly have no compliance requirements, will benefit from
They're going to
having a
have
resilience
something.
team. Just to
Yeah.
think about how you're going to keep your business operational if something does happen. And
Hmm.
one of the stories I remember hearing about years ago, which kind of took a while for it to really resonate with me, but do you remember the World Trade Center Twin Towers? Not when it went down in nine
No.
eleven, but
The
a couple
first
years
time was
prior to
like
that, somebody drove a truck.
90.
Yeah, somebody
Oh,
drove
that one.
a
Yeah,
truck
yeah,
into the
yeah.
basement and tried to, or I think they did does detonate
Hmm.
some type of bomb at the
Yeah.
base level of one of the towers, and relatively minor damage, but because of what it did and because of the investigation, a lot of businesses were not allowed into their office building for, I think, at least 2 weeks, maybe as far as a month. And so a lot of stories that came out of that were there were businesses that went out of business during that
Hmm.
time because they essentially were locked out of their key resources, which were locked in that building, and they could not get into them to gain access to continue operating. So they went anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, offline, and went out of
Hmm.
business. And I know it's hard to imagine today, especially now that we're so dispersed. We've got things in the cloud, but I know we still have clients who have things locked away in certain areas. And just thinking about all the turmoil that's gone on in the city of Chicago and other cities as well, there's nothing to say that something couldn't happen to a building that would just require you to not have access to it.
Mhm.
And piggybacking off that, we had a client who went remote, like all of our clients during the pandemic, started working outside the office. So nobody was in the office for several weeks and several months now. But we were having an issue early on with gaining access to one of the servers. And of course, we didn't know why. So we had to send someone on site. And when we got there, we discovered that because the air conditioner was not running because nobody was there, the server room was boiling. It was like easily 100 degrees in there.
Overheating.
And so things were
Yeah.
starting to fail. So these are just example stories of where you think, oh, that would never happen to me. I don't need to be prepared for that. But you just
Right.
don't know what's going to happen, including one more story related to a server room. I remember years ago we got a call that it was raining in a server room,
Oh
and
no.
and you're like, what, raining? So
Oh
there was a
no.
leak upstairs, and that
Yeah.
leak found its way downstairs, and it literally was raining in the server room. So you can imagine
That's a pretty
a room that you
common.
just don't anticipate ever having water in it is
Right.
now literally
Right.
swamped. But
Well, that's a really great example because I've dealt with that probably half a dozen times, just since I've been in Chicago. But it's where you put, right. If you're starting up a business, it's not unusual for whoever to do it, to install it in a space in a building on a floor or whatever that has, say, a fire extinguishing system in the floor. You definitely don't want to
oh, like a
install like your
sprinkler
server
system.
rack and your core routers and things, yeah, under a sprinkler system, right? So I mean, there's a
Yeah,
lot of things that that these teams bring perspective: HR, finance, and they usually work best in like
yeah.
3 to 4 people. Not a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but just enough to I say I try to discourage more than five.
So
6 is like top
HR,
max.
finance,
Finance,
operations.
COO, yeah, COO, CFOs, people, officers, HR pros,
Hmm.
someone from the technical side, someone from the account side, delivery side, someone who's
Hmm.
kind of the
So I
client
think that's our
facing.
that's our five. We got
Yeah.
HR, finance, operations, technical, and
Yep.
account management. So
That's ideal. That's
yeah, that
ideal, right? If you
that's
can do
that's
that,
the max. Something
um,
something
or any
like that.
combination. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every culture is different. So you're right. It's a case by case basis.
And it could be in smaller teams. It could be somebody who does fill multiple roles, like a business or
Hmm.
owner. Our team of 12 is a good example. I do have multiple hats that I wear, but it is important. It's super important, no matter what size organization, that you have people from the top involved in the resilience team, because too often I see the managers kind of say, "Oh, I don't have time for that. That's not important to me. I'm going to assign it to somebody else on the team." But then they don't give that team the power to make decisions and take action.
Hmm.
So
Right.
a lot of things just never get accomplished.
And
You've never
leadership
seen that,
doesn't
have you, Chad?
necessarily. No, I've never seen
Hmm.
that, Ben. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's not. I was going to say too. I mean, you're reading my mind, and this idea that leadership. Someone, if you're a privately owned company, which most of the small mid-sized markets are, you're ultimately responsible for your risk. I mean, you can't shuffle that off on someone. You're certainly not a third party service provider. I mean, you can try, but at the end of the conversation or whatever, if you have a risk, you have owned risk in a business as a leader, business owner, proprietor, whatever you call yourself. You have a certain amount of owned risk, and some of that risk is acceptable. You want that risk. Nothing good comes without risk. You don't make any money
Hmm.
without putting something on the line. But some of the risk is completely preventable. You don't need to
Hmm.
be owning. In some cases we see up to 40% of someone's total risk appetite is made up by almost half risks that they don't need to, own.
Mm.
And these aren't in necessarily large, complex organizations. These are in small, mid-sized organizations, right? That are completely capable. The large organizations are pretty calcified, right? Culturally, workflow. It's hard for them to shift. But one of the good things about a resilience team is it can really start changing the course of the ship very quickly because you have these perspectives at the table. And that's, more than any policy or technology you can add to your organization right now. I don't think there's anything more effective or for the time spent than a resilience team.
So let's imagine we decide we want to put together a resilience team, and we get all of our representatives, maximum of 5 people in the room. Maybe we could walk through what they might do, as an example, maybe on day one, or maybe just kind of more broadly.
Sure.
What do you think?
Well, it's
What would you say?
prioritization. I mean, right now, the first thing that a resilience team should be focused on is prioritization, right? So if, for example, you have a workforce that's never been remote, I'm just spitballing here, right? So
Yeah.
Every culture is going to be different, but that's why you have to have all these perspectives, because you don't know what's a priority until you talk to everybody, right?
Right.
And then as a collective say, oh, well, these things, and you'll start to learn very quickly, which is the point, how all this stuff is interconnected, right? So if we pull in a little string over here, it's going to move the whole kit and caboodle. And that's the mindset. We're trying to shape mental models here, right?
Yeah.
That's our first goal, is this resilience mindset, and we have to work at it together. And so the first thing that we need to do is prioritize. And that is, when the first meeting of a resilience team is, what are your top 2 priorities from your part of the world, right? So from an HR perspective, from a finance perspective,
And
from a client, whatever these things.
you just reminded me, and maybe this is a better example of when we get that team together for the first time. One of the things we do is we kind of give them a baseline of, this is why we're coming together. These are the types of things we're going to be looking at. And then we kind of break up after the fact. And I know you interview those team members one-on-one to kind of understand, how they use technology. And you've heard you've heard me say this before, but Forget Computers has a lot of data on our clients as far as the hardware and the software. Well, and that's
The quantitative stuff.
The quantitative, yeah. But
Yeah.
the qualitative, we don't really know how they use that technology. I mean, sometimes we do. We get some insights based on questions or issues that we're troubleshooting or projects that we're involved in. But oftentimes we don't know that. And even when we think we do, and even when we think leadership knows, when we get right down to it and we talk to leadership, and then maybe we talk to some of the employees, we start to uncover ways that people are using technology that no one knew about.
No.
And sometimes
they all say the same
bigger
thing.
risk.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, just this, they're all very, I would say 90, in the high 90% consistent and saying, oh, our people are great. They're awesome. We don't use any third-party tool. They all know what to do. They're all using the same tool sets, and we all always come back, and there's an enormous amount, of what we call segmentation, right? Which is not the goal. I mean, segmentation meaning everybody's using their own tool set, and there's nothing really sanctioned. There's nothing documented. They're probably using personal accounts. They're not using, there's not a lot of standardization, and the standardization is another goal, of the resilience team. Resilience, and you brought up a really great angle to this, Ben, is, security. Maybe the difference is the cybersecurity teams and folks that I've worked with over the years, they focus on this quantitative side of things, just like IT, right? It's like, maybe it's because so much of it is out of our control, and they glob onto the things that they can control, and maybe that's human nature.
Very black and white.
But resilient, it is, it is, and it's also very quantifiable, right? Because machines are easy. If something's broken or something, then it's my fault. Right, as an implementer, I deployed it before I maybe understood how it would, react to something larger than itself, a complex system, right? And so you have this reliance, and I think a bit of laziness. I'm probably incriminating, me and all of our technical people over the years, because maybe we've relied on that quantitative side of things too much because it was safe or it was easy, and the qualitative is messy, right? Like people are messy. Right. Hacking machines is easy. People, not so much. It depends, right? I mean, phishing,
Yeah.
there's a lot of social engineering pretexts and things. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about helping people build good habits is not
Hmm.
easy, right? And
Right.
because resilience is a behavioral challenge, we can't have these conversations by ignoring and without addressing the qualitative side of things, right? Like, how are people using technology?
Hmm.
Okay, we know what tools they're using, we know version numbers, and we know hardware and firmware and all the schwack that we need to know,
And we
but
know it's
how
always
are they
changing.
using it?
Yeah.
It's
But how are
always
we
changing,
using it?
right?
Yeah.
But behaviors are tend to be really consistent, and so there is some
Yeah.
value in measuring this stuff, right? And it can be done in a way, and we have to, because otherwise, the kinds of things that security teams build, they don't apply to the culture, and people work around it, and they create more risk anyway. And then the leadership team has spent all this time and money putting in a program that's not helping
Yeah.
anyone. So it's a
So
selfish motive, but it's also practical. It's pragmatic.
yeah. So step one with that team is really to uncover the risk. I'm
Yep.
oversimplifying it. Uncover
That's
the
it, though.
risk, and in my experience, and this will be a little self-serving, but teams often don't look upon themselves as honestly as they need to, and that's
That's
where
true.
it's important to have a third party,
Hmm.
us in many cases with our clients, look at their risk and say, well, here's what I see, here's what I heard you say, here's what we probably need to consider. And because when a team tries to do that for themselves, it just doesn't always, uh, like I said, they just don't look as deep as maybe they should, and we're all guilty of it.
It's hard.
I
It's hard. Yeah,
but
it's hard.
let's
And risk isn't
imagine.
something we can do that with. We can't. It can't be, emotional or intuitive. It's
Yeah.
very scientific. And we can help. As a resilience team, right? That's what we do, as we help determine what levels are appropriate in terms of compliance. Does it make sense for us as a business, right? Maybe we have a client that's coming to us and saying, "Hey, do you have this whole business continuity plan?" Well, it takes hundreds of hours to build that, right? That's money and
Yeah.
time and resources, and maybe it makes sense for that client. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe we just need to help them understand scope better, right? But you
Right.
can't do that if you don't have at least a basic resilience team to help you make those determinations, and from different perspectives, because you may just say something, but you haven't talked to the COO, you haven't
Hmm.
confirmed with HR, right? And so
Yeah.
this is getting more and more important as time goes
Yeah.
on.
So I would say we uncover the risk, and then back to your point of prioritization, you get the
Hmm.
resilience team together, and you say, okay, here's what we uncovered, and believe me, it's going to be overwhelming what you
It
uncover.
is, yeah.
It's going to be like,
Hmm.
oh my God, this is way too much, and that's okay. This is just your findings, but you're going to prioritize some of those things, and those priorities could change as your
Yep.
clients change or the needs of your business change, but you're going to have those priorities, maybe two or three, and you're going to start chipping away at it. And then you're going to periodically meet to reevaluate those priorities and see what has changed and see if you need to refocus. Um, and another good example is when clients of our clients drive the direction of the resiliency team.
They're driving
So,
all of this.
yeah.
They're driving all of it. I mean, this isn't, we're not, we've been recommending this for years, right? I mean,
Hmm.
there are, different contexts and
Yeah.
ways, but it's hard to connect the concrete value of this outside of this context that you just mentioned,
Hmm.
right? Is that it's your clients, and I'm talking to you, like the royal you out there who are
Yeah.
listening to this, right? This is your clients, maybe not today, but you're your clients tomorrow. They just want to know, can they defend you in an audit?
Hmm.
And if the answer is yes, you're doing some things that are demonstrable. That's great.
We talked
But
that
if
we,
you
I know.
aren't, then you've got another set of challenges, and
Oh,
that's very real.
yeah, I want to come back to, can you defend yourself in an audit, and talk a little bit more about that. But
Mm.
before we do, when clients of a client, I'm trying to think of a better way to talk about that. Client of a client.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, when they
Large
ask,
companies, the big, you know,
yeah,
the
just as
Fortune
a quick,
1,000 companies,
I say
basically.
quick summary, and then I talk for 5 minutes. But when a client of yours, when a client of yours says, "Are you doing X, Y, and Z?" We get these SIGs, these standard information gathering Excel sheets
Questionnaires.
that are
Yeah.
unbelievably long and complex looking, and they say, "Are you doing X, Y, and Z?" There sometimes it's valid to push back and say, you know what, this I understand this is your standard procedure, but the project we're working on with you is nowhere near the scope of investigation that you're asking for. Sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes you can go back to your client and say that, and they will say, oh, you're right, this project
Especially
is
if you've
small.
done some of this
Yeah,
planning that we're talking about, right? If you haven't done any
yeah,
of this planning, then I don't recommend pushing back, because
yeah.
that's going to land them in your, in your stuff, doing a much more in-depth audit. So you have to
Yeah,
want to
I guess
tread
what I'm trying
carefully.
to say is, and I've seen
Yeah.
this happen with us and with our clients, there are certain situations where you're working with either a bigger client or a name brand client, and they give you a questionnaire that's really written for all types of companies. We're a 12-person size company. If we get a SIG written for a 5,000 person, enterprise organization, we may not be able to meet all of the requirements because we're too small to even afford the resources required to, in some cases.
Right.
And I
We're
have
going to
had
help them
success.
understand
Yeah.
the scope and the kinds of things that we are doing that are appropriate for the size, scope,
Right.
right, and level of complexity of our industry. And
And
that takes a little bit of.
I
Go ahead.
personally remember years ago getting some requirements like, in order to do business with us, you must do X, Y, and Z.
You got to be
And
this
I
tall
went
to ride the ride.
and I went back to them and said, I would love to do this, but what you're asking me to do will cost more than what I'm even
I'm
charging you
making
to
sure,
do to
sure.
do this project.
That's a
And they
call.
said,
Yep,
you're right. Well, and they made adjustments. But
totally.
there are other
Yep.
situations where it's a big project, and you could be
Hmm.
a small 5-person company,
Or a
one
long-term
person company,
relationship,
or a long-term
sometimes
relationship.
distance. Yeah.
It could be a project that is totally worth investing in to meet those requirements. And Chad, you and I talk about this a lot. When your clients ask you for that information, you want to be honest about it, because too many times I
Mhm.
see people just try to fill it out to get the job. Like, I'm just going to, can you just help me fill this out so I can get this job? And that is so dangerous, because if something goes wrong in that job, the level, and Chad, you say this a lot, the level of scrutiny goes through the roof, right? And they will
Mhm.
uncover things that you were not doing, which means who's going to take the blame when that happens. Another example related to that is, I see people who have insurance policies that say, we will cover you or protect your business if you do X, Y, and Z. The problem is they're not doing X, Y, or Z.
Mhm.
So when it comes time to collect on that insurance policy, if it's a big enough, the insurance carrier will do some due diligence and investigation, and in some cases they won't cover it, and we've seen that. So that's why
It's
it's
becoming more
important.
common.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, we would
Yeah.
expected it, right? I mean, it would have continued to evolve that way anyway, but COVID just amplified and,
Yeah.
sped everything up. And so now we're in a situation where whoever downloaded the information security policies off the internet, some templates that
Hmm.
they got online, um, they're going to be awesome. They're going to be in great shape as long as nothing happens.
Yeah.
Um, and if something happens, oh man, they've already forgotten that they downloaded these policies and where, and that they haven't looked at them. And you have to be able to map, concretely in an incident scenario, um, policies to procedures,
Hmm.
right? So you have to be able to demonstrate concretely, and then we've been doing this for a while. So
Hmm.
ignorance doesn't fly anymore. So, if something happened and
Hmm.
we had to, do this stuff, we would have to produce this stuff very quickly. We wouldn't have, time to produce this stuff. And so it's really about minimizing that. This resilience team is about minimizing loss. Okay. It's a
Hmm.
loss prevention team. Think
Hmm.
about it like that, because there are so many losses, and we get sometimes these numbers shared with us, with clients. It's not unusual for multi-million dollar, 10, 20, $30 million a year companies to have, upwards of, $100,000 in loss, preventable
Hmm.
loss. And so that's really the business value of this team is, how can you quickly, have these half-hour meetings every quarter or whatever, and get some of the
Hmm.
stuff on the radar. And it's different for every company. But you can imagine for your own company, like who would be at that table, who
Yeah.
what kinds of conversations would you have? And it doesn't have to take much, right? It's just time. It doesn't require spending a lot, but the
Hmm.
return on this is kind of the point you were making, Ben. Is please, if you're a small or mid-sized company working for a Fortune 1000 or whatever, don't just sign these and accept their risk. You're not getting any
Hmm.
value on behalf of your company. You're accepting risk on behalf of a much larger one that has armies of attorneys and response and
Yeah.
incident, security people and legal. I mean, you name it. And so it's really important to get some value for yourself. And that's what we're saying is like this resilience team can your loss
Hmm.
prevention team can really pay for itself,
Yeah.
depending on what you find, for sure.
I also see the resilience team as being advocates, like internal advocates for all of your initiatives. Like you need some leaders to
Mm.
make workflow changes, make culture changes. Because some of these things are not popular ideas, like uh,
No,
you know
they're not.
rolling out any initiative requiring extra work, whether it's two-factor
Mhm.
authentication or a different way of doing
Any
things, like
workflow
not.
change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not
Yep.
going to be popular. But if you have a core group of
No.
leaders that understand the importance of it in protecting the
And that people
business,
trust. That's
yeah,
important too.
then they can be a voice to get that information out, and they can also be
Yep.
someone who will nudge people when they see them straying in different directions, and they can start to build, you know, their reach as they educate their own team and their within the organization. So you're really shifting the entire organization into becoming a more resilient organization.
And that's the
Um,
goal. That's the ultimate goal, is a mindset, right? Is a
mhm,
resilience mindset. Like how, and not bolting it on, right? I mean, that's what that was the mistake, arguably, that the critical mistake that cybersecurity made was trying to bolt it on,
mhm,
aftermarket. Like, all right, make your app, make your company, make your product, make your service, whatever, and then bolt security on later. We'll worry about that later. That
yeah,
didn't work. That's how we got here. And so,
mhm,
we're trying to build this mindset that is from the start of a program. What's the resilience mindset? Okay, well, where's this documentation going to live? Who's going to own it? All these different pieces. And we think that we've got these workflows styled out in organizations, but then you run into a pandemic and realize, oh, wow, there was so much about how things work that I didn't know, you know?
mhm,
Um, and so it's really about efficiency at the end
mhm.
of the conversation, is really about, minimizing risk, and really
Yeah.
getting the most value out of the things that we're doing.
And I still talk to too many people who feel like they don't have anything to protect, even though they clearly have a
Yeah,
business and
sure.
employees and clients. And for me personally, one of the most powerful ways of thinking through this, like whether you should be doing something or not, is to think about it. How would you explain this to your client? Like if something happened and a project you were working on was compromised, whether through no fault of your own, even, like if you're hosting with a cloud provider and something happens to the cloud provider
Sure.
and your accounts get compromised, you have to be able to sit across from the client and explain to them everything you did to protect them, and and feel good about it. And so when people
And
say I don't
my
have
answer.
anything, what's that?
My answer to that. You've been in the room when
Yeah, what's
someone's
your answer?
asked me that question. I
Yeah,
always have
what's
the
your
same answer. I'm like, they say, "Oh, I don't have anything. I don't have anything, valuable that worth protecting." And I always say, maybe it's a bad habit. I should change it. I say, "Well, do you have a reputation?"
yeah.
Because it's not even about productivity or bottom line directly. These
Hmm.
incidents cause a lot of fallout and costs that are hard to quantify.
Hmm.
And reputation is at the heart of most of that, because if I get caught, say I'm a company that's been doing business for 40 years, it doesn't really matter. I've been doing business for 50 years, 100 years, and I have all these great relationships and trust with all my clients, and something happens and I'm suddenly under the spotlight, the level of scrutiny goes through, and I can't lie about my incompetence.
Hmm.
I can't use my ignorance as a defense that I didn't have awareness of my compliance responsibilities, that I didn't have someone care that I was employing to care and do that on behalf of my as a competent business person, right? Ultimately, I own the risk as the business owner. That's what I'm saying. It's like, this isn't, you can't get away with this anymore. We used to be able to kind of help smaller, mid-sized clients kind of skirt past all of this. And I mean, I don't think you can get away with it for another year. Those days are over. And now we have to really be competent. We have to think about that everything that we do in terms of sharing information with each other is can impact something larger than ourselves, you know, when something unplanned happens, right?
So one of the things
We all
we've
share the
talked
same
about,
fate, I say.
yeah, we share the same fate. And one of the things that we talk about, Chad, often is we all know some people, some partners who like to negotiate, right? Like everything's negotiable. Let's talk through this. And to a certain extent, I understand that, but you
Those are good
cannot
skills.
negotiate risk.
You can't. No, you
Right.
can't. It would be great if we could outsource our risk, or you know, like you know, kind of, you know, and sometimes we can negotiate scope. We certainly can do that, you know, and Ben, you know, you and I, we've spent a fair amount of our time in, you know, what used to be physical conference rooms, you know, and now it's virtual, with these, you know, Fortune 500 security teams, and trying to help define scope. And that's why doing this work makes that even faster, right? Because if you have a resilience, once you have a resilience team, you've had some, you know, exposure and experience, and you've answered some of these questions, and you've gotten down the road with that a little bit more. You're a little bit more mature. These kinds of inquiries from these clients are super fast, and it's even a competitive differentiator, because word gets around, like who handles these really quickly and who doesn't. You know, there's an internal chatter about that stuff, and so you want to be on the upside of that chatter. You don't want to be on the downside of it. Right. You don't want to be like on that's used to fly. Now that doesn't fly, and it's not good for business.
And I would say, even if you're, you know, we work with a lot of teams within larger organizations, and maybe, you know, the team could have their own, you know, sort of mini resilience
Yeah,
team
I've seen that work
to,
very well.
to focus on
In larger
their own
organizations.
workflow, their own
Yeah, if you're part of a
implementation.
business unit and in a larger organization, like you said, that's incredibly effective. And a lot of times, I've even, you know, at a domestic airline that I once worked with, that, you know, we either love or hate, we'd had a very similar situation where we built an internal, you know, team for one particular unit, and it caught on. And next thing we knew, we had, you know, of course, there was a leadership turnover, and so they reset after I left. But there was this very great shift there, that everybody saw the value in this, you know, very quickly, to talk about perspectives and risks, because, you know, nobody wants this stuff. Right. And if we could have an annual meeting once a year to bring some things to light, whether it's, even if it's an initiative, right? If you're trying to do something that affects change, that it touches more than just your own internal immediate team, right? Even if you're a company of 10 people, it helps to have some kind of a strategy, right? And have like a how do you say, like a pipeline for that. And a resilience team can, you know, I mean, it is really amazing the kinds of pipelines that you can build from just quick conversations.
I mean, some of these teams we work with within larger organizations, they're bigger than our team, our small company. So clearly, they probably have a more complex workflow than most, and it would be worth sitting down and doing their due diligence to think through how they can be more resilient. And in fact, why are we spending so much time talking about this, Chad? I would say my answer is, it's so much nicer to think through this when there's a period of calm and there's
Yes.
nothing forcing us to make decisions or to react.
Right.
I mean, unfortunately, how often are we building resilience teams after something terrible has happened?
Most of the
As you
time,
say,
you know, and
that could have been preventable.
yeah, most of the time. I mean, even my own experience, right? I can't take credit for being drawn to this, right? It was really clients and other experiences that shaped and led me into this work, right? It was
Same
really
here.
driven by the needs. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't something that I think is exciting either. But it's definitely something that gives me a lot of peace of mind. And so initially, when, you know, I was in systems engineering and things early, you know, 20, 25 years ago, it was really a big part of the value, you know, or kind of an implicit part of my role in organizations, to take care of this stuff, because I couldn't sleep at night. I knew that if something happened, it was going to fall on no one. And because it was not on anyone, it was going to fall on whoever was the most technically fluent or whatever, right? And so it was out of necessity that I initially got into building these kinds of ideas and plans, because you're right, Ben. I think it's perfectly normal. As humans, we're not wired to be, I mean, look at the pandemic response around the world. It's, different levels of failure. No one really was prepared. And so it's really not in our nature. And that's why we need all the help we can get to try to, stay on track and build these things at a time. Because you're right, man, they're way more fun, number one, to build these. It's almost uniting experience to build this proactively, an ideal, when the sun is out, introducing people to these ideas in the sunshine is way better than the storm of a crisis. I mean, and not to mention it's much more exponentially more expensive and just stressful. And, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, ideally it would be being proactive, but that's not always, the case. And so anything that, can catalyze this in an organization, if it's something bad, it's really a great opportunity to build, a more resilient, culture.
And
for
I
the
would
future.
say, even if the goal is to be more resilient, they're often along the process of uncovering the risk and making adjustments. You also improve your workflow. I mean, 9 times out of 10, you uncover something
always
that just doesn't make sense, and you can make it better. Maybe it's more secure, maybe it's more efficient, maybe it's both.
Usually eliminating things, even steps in a process, saying, "Oh, why guys do that? Oh, did you know you could do that?" By eliminating, making things more friendly, more user friendly. They're always usually more secure too.
Eliminating an application, eliminating risk. So just to summarize it, because we've gone on, as we always do, beyond our
half big
hour.
Topic. Sure.
So why do you want to do this? You want to do this because it's good for your business, and you want to do it now before something bad happens. You want to involve multiple team members from different departments, or if you're your own department, just a few different perspectives. And you want to think about, how can we be more resilient? And maybe along with that, how can we be more efficient to reduce our risk and to recover from things that could happen that would impact our business? And then you want to start moving toward improvements. And this is where people can have the overwhelming feeling that this is impossible. And I would say, just prioritize and start moving forward. That's the best you can do. You start improving that framework that guides you, and you start making improvements. And it's the people who get what's the term where you paralysis by analysis. They just lock up and they don't do anything. Like, that's just as bad as never starting in the first place if you're not going to actually make any progress. So there's
we don't want to be
one
perfectionists about this.
Yeah, you can't be a perfectionist.
Any partial step is incredibly, I mean, you'll see. I mean, I wish I could, kind of do the Vulcan mind meld, because to just follow through on one little piece at a time, it's incredibly empowering. I mean, number one, it gives us a lot of peace of mind for pound for pound. And so it's really a selfish thing that you can feel. If you need to deliver a shiny object to a leadership team, this can be, this can be an idea too. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can get personal, something selfish out of this too.
We work with a lot of creatives, a lot of creative teams, and I know a lot of creatives are perfectionists. They're perfectionists in the work that they do, and it can be challenging when they're dealing with something as ambiguous as risk management. So I know it's hard, but I know it can be done, and it can be overcome. So
it can
start your team, start having your first meeting.
Hey, we've had, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
We have, some creative companies that we work with, and one of them even went so far, I won't mention any names, I'll be discreet, but one of them went so far as to create a most elegant, typographic and styled and design. I mean, just really elegant one pager of all their policies. I mean, it was just, there's so many. We're willing. I mean, you don't think you know who you're talking to, but we can do some pretty amazing things to drive this in your culture, and it is so worth it. I mean, to start building now, you can't plant a garden. You can't just put your garden in, right? You have to plant seeds and wait. And this is what we're saying. We're like, start planting some seeds. It's worth it.
Yeah. And if you need help growing that garden, get us involved.
Ask.
From
Please
a
ask us. Yeah.
outside perspective looking in, we can
Yeah.
certainly help. And because I want to avoid the phone call where I hear we have to react and then we have to do all this stuff in preparation for the next time. I want to do it when we can all just, as you say, sit back, have as much fun as you can have with the resilience team. And I know it doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but certainly is a lot more relaxing. Yeah. Okay. Anything else we want to add, or Michelle? Anything that we totally hacked our way through and you want us to clarify because it didn't make any sense as you were trying to jot down these notes?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Any questions? Do we get any questions from the audience today? Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, I want to remind everyone that we were slow in posting our last 2 recordings, but they are up now. That is return to work. We talked a little bit about returning to work and what that means. And in fact, we had someone go in today for the first time and fire up a computer that was, grossly out of date because it had been sitting off for the past 3 or 4 months. And so it took some time to get that back up and running to a state at which it was operational, which is hard to imagine. You're like, well, I left and it was perfectly fine. And now I'm back. It should be perfectly fine. But things change so rapidly that in 3 or 4 months, it was like all the apps were out of date. It had security updates. It just needed, some time before it could be operational. So be prepared for that if you're heading back to the office. And then we also did a recording on Ring Central, which we're using the new Ring Central here, which is still just shy of the old Ring Central in full feature and functionality, but does have some benefits.
How's mine today? Is mine skippy or pretty solid?
No, yours is great.
Cool.
And I know we talked about some other topics, like going deeper again into 1Password and password managers.
Oh, right.
And I think there's another topic that came up. Oh, well, we talked about Office 365 and just all the integrations that Office 365 has today that people are taking advantage of. That's another potential topic. We want to hear more topics from you. And so send us feedback and watch the recording when we get it posted. Why would I tell someone to watch the recording when we get it posted if they're watching it right now? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know. It's cool.
Listen to our podcast too. Listen to our podcast.
Posterity. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Thanks for making time.
I'm done advertising. Forget computers. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.